Hey there, I'm David Schloss with a review today of the new Leica M10. You know, this is the first completely new M-series body from Leica since 2009 when the M9 came out. They've had a couple of updates to the M-series bodies, including some monochrome versions, a version without an LCD screen on the back. They've improved the sensor in the cameras, but they really haven't done a complete overhaul of the Leica M-series. The M10 does an overhaul, although with Leica it's a typically understated overhaul. Now the M10 has got a 24 megapixel sensor. That's the same resolution as the previous updates of the M9 have had, but it's a new sensor. This sensor gives it an ISO range from 100 to 50,000 ISO. It also has the new Maestro 2 processor in it. That's what the Leica Q uses. That's also what the Leica SL uses. That gives this camera the ability to shoot up to 5 frames per second for 30 RAW images or 100 JPEG images. Now, a lot of people say, okay, Leica is really expensive, and that's true. One of the reasons we're taking a look at the Leica M10 is not only does it set the benchmark for rangefinder type cameras, and so companies that make rangefinder systems like Fuji are something that we judge against the M10, but also if you look at Leica in the range of prices, it's really not that bad for the upper end professional that's looking to shoot with a rangefinder. For example, the M10 is about $6,500 retail. The Nikon D5 is also about $6,500 retail. Now, it's more money than the 1DX Mark II. You don't get the same high performance, high speed as those cameras, but if you're already investing a lot of money in camera systems, the Leica system will set you back, but it's not quite the same amount as that perceived difference between some of the other platforms. Now, I grew up around Leica cameras. My dad was a commercial shooter. He had the Leica M3. I'm used to shooting with a rangefinder. I don't particularly like shooting with a rangefinder, but there's a lot of people who really like the way that this camera shoots. So with a rangefinder, unlike an SLR, there's a separate image that you use for focusing as used for capturing the image. And that gives you a little bit of a parallax, but it also means that when you're looking through the optical viewfinder, you're not seeing exactly what the lens sees, which means that you have to crop things in the optical viewfinder to what are called bright lines, which are lines that show you where your particular lens is going to crop off. If you're used to shooting in a rangefinder, that's no problem at all. If you're not used to shooting in a rangefinder, it's a little bit confusing. Speaking of the Leica M3, the Leica M10 is both thinner and narrower than the Leica M9, which makes it the same width and depth as the film series cameras. It isn't exactly noticeable, but if you're holding the Leica M10, it does feel a little bit lighter and it does feel a little bit more comfortable in your hands. Now, it's taller than the film series cameras, but these two dimensions at least are exactly the same as the film cameras, which gives it a nicer profile compared to the Leica M9, which always felt a little bit chunky to me. It felt a little bit like a Leica that had grown a little bit too large. Leica's made some pretty interesting design choices with this camera. On the top of the camera is a very sparse display layout. We have controls for shutter speed. We have a new ISO control dial, which the M9 did not have. That keeps you from having to jump into a menu in order to do your ISO settings. Now, it's a little bit difficult to activate this ISO dial, which is fine with me. I either have my ISO set for automatic when I'm moving between different lighting situations, or I set my ISO and I want it to stay where it is. A lot of cameras have either exposure compensation dials or ISO dials that are very easy to bump. You're not going to bump this dial. Speaking of exposure compensation dials, there isn't one here on the Leica M10, which means that you're going to have to nail your exposure using shutter speed and using aperture. That is something that a lot of Leica shooters pride themselves on being able to do, so it's not a big deal. But since you are usually relying on the in-camera metering, I like having exposure compensation for really quick adjustments on the fly to override the camera's metering in certain situations. It is not necessarily easy when you're shooting something in flux to be able to reach to the top and dial in your shutter speed. There is a dial on the back, which you can use for changing settings. On the back of the camera, there are very few controls, and I think anybody who's used to Leica will really appreciate the sparsity of this layout, but anybody who's used to a system where you have lots of programmable buttons is not going to be exactly comfortable shooting with this. There's a live view button, there's a play button, there's a menu button, that's it. Leica has also gotten rid of some things in this camera. There's no longer a USB port on the side of the camera, which means that you cannot connect the camera to your computer. They have included Wi-Fi in this camera, and you can use the Wi-Fi connection to use the iOS app. There isn't an Android app as of this recording, but you can use the iOS app to transfer pictures. You can also use it as a wireless remote controller. Leica also says that they've updated the water sealing on this camera, so the camera is a little bit splash-proof and dust-proof. One thing that is in common with the rest of the Leica cameras, though, is that in order to change either the battery or the card, you need to take off the bottom plate. Certainly when the bottom plate is removed, there isn't a lot of water protection, and we don't see any gaskets on this bottom plate. That's the same as previous Leica models, which means that there's probably not any water protection on the bottom. So if you're out and you're working with the Leica M10, you're going to want to make sure that water doesn't get anywhere near the bottom of the system. Another thing that Leica left out of the camera is the ability to record video. There is no video recording in the Leica M10. In this day and age, I don't really see a reason for a camera to not at least offer basic video recording capabilities. It makes the Leica M10 a little bit less versatile for most shooters than the Leica M9. I think it's a strange choice. I think we're likely going to see an update to the M10 in a year or 2 years that puts some video back in, but again, it's Leica, they like to take things out. This is the company, after all, that released a camera that's a digital camera with no LCD screen on the back of the camera at all. When Leica decides to take something out, they take it out. Now, while Leica made the camera smaller and lighter, it also did some improvements as well. The viewfinder is 30% brighter than the viewfinder on the M9 camera, and also it works better for people shooting the M10 with glasses, which is probably a good idea since Leica tends to skew towards the older photographic demographic anyhow. Now, if you're interested in shooting with an electronic viewfinder, there is an optional model that comes and it sits on top of the camera on the hot shoe. It also gives you GPS, and so for some people, having the viewfinder might be a good idea simply to be able to geotag your images. It's an interesting choice to put the GPS receiver in a viewfinder. I guess Leica didn't want to make too many different ports to give you accessories. We're also not quite sure why there isn't GPS in the camera. We think all cameras should have GPS capabilities in them at this point. Now, there are some other things you will not find in this camera. You will not find image stabilization. You will not find dust removal. You will not find a touchscreen LCD screen. If those things are important for you, another system is probably a better choice. Now, image quality with the Leica M10 is on par with or better than the image quality from the Leica M9, which you would expect. We've always liked the look from Leica, although a lot of the look has come from the glass and not from the sensor itself. Certainly there's more robust sensors available on the market today. There's sensors with higher resolution. The Leica combination of glass and sensor does produce a good look. Personally, my favorite look from a Leica system is on the Leica monochrome. That sensor has no color information being recorded. It's a beautiful sensor and it's great for shooting monochrome, so I'm hoping that there'll be a monochrome version based on the M10. The buffer worked as advertised. We were able to shoot 5 frames per second with the Leica M10, although 5 frames per second shooting is probably not something most rangefinder users are looking for. It did work as advertised, and it is something that steps up the performance from the Leica M9. So the question, of course, is who exactly is the Leica M10 for? And I think that there's a couple of different types of customers. I think that there's the customer that grew up with Leica systems that's very comfortable with the rangefinder. They're very comfortable with the form factor of Leica, and they love the optics of the Leica system. I think that's the primary customer. I think for those people, the Leica M10 is a good upgrade over the M9. If you're not in the market for a brand new camera, I don't think that the M10 is enough to make you sell an M9 or pick up a secondary M9, especially with a price point of around $6,500. Now, I think that the other market for the M10 is the street and travel photographer who's looking to travel light and unobtrusively. Back when my dad was a shooter in the 60s and 70s, Leica wasn't as well known as it is today outside of the photographic circles, and so you could travel with a Leica M3, have excellent glass, have an excellent body in a very small package, and sort of get away with not being seen as being a professional photographer with a professional body. These days, I don't think that you can do that. In fact, Leica sent us the cameras with the Leica product information and the classic red dot taped over. This is something my dad used to do as a shooter too. I think that that red Leica dot says to people that you're shooting with a Leica now. It takes away some of that unobtrusiveness of shooting with a Leica. Also, if you're looking for a camera that's a small lightweight travel camera, there's other systems available that are actually smaller and lighter, although not with a great lens selection that is available in the small size for the Leica body. If you're already shooting with the Leica platform, the Leica M10 is going to be a great addition to the family. It's not necessarily a camera you're going to want to go out and sell your M9 to purchase, but when you're in the market for your next Leica camera, this is going to be a great update. as long as you're willing to lose a couple of features. Again, no touchscreen on here, there's no USB port on here, there's some functionality that's not on a lot of today's cameras. I don't think that's going to be a big deal for a lot of Leica shooters. I think that removing features is more along the lines of what Leica has traditionally done than adding features. And I think that most shooters of Leica cameras are going to be fine losing a couple of features to get a smaller body that's more like the film cameras. If you'd like more information about the Leica M10 and the Leica family of cameras, you can visit their website at leica-camera.com. And if you'd like some more information from us, you can visit us at digitalphotopro.com or right here on our channel. Thanks so much for watching.